Okay, ready to dive deep. Today we're tackling something that sounds simple but gets complicated quickly. Legitimate evaluation.
Yeah, legitimate is one of those words researchers toss around, but what's it actually mean in the real world?
We think we know, right? But then try to define it. Suddenly, not so easy.
Exactly, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. You, our listeners, sent in articles by Jennifer Greene. She's a big name in evaluation, and she uses the word legitimate a lot.
So we're on a mission. What does Jennifer Greene think makes for a legitimate evaluation? We're looking at her work over a long period, too, from 1987 to 2016.
Important time frame.
Yeah.
That's when evaluation was really becoming its own field. Imagine trying to write the rules for a game while people are still playing it and figuring things out.
Got it.
That was Greene's world.
So we've got our expert, Jennifer Greene, and writings from when evaluation was still forming. Where do we even start with legitimate evaluation?
Well, the dictionary, right, it might say something like lawful or generally accepted, but laws change, right? And so do our beliefs about, everything.
So an evaluation that's legitimate now might have been really controversial back then.
Exactly. The dictionary definition is too simple. This isn't just checking boxes. Greene makes us think harder. Whose opinions matter? Whose values are we centering? And how does that affect what we call legitimate?
Okay, so there's a lot more to it than a simple definition. We've got context, power dynamics, maybe even pushing against how things are usually done.
You got it. And you can see how important this is by how often Greene uses legitimate. In these articles alone, it's like every 1,922 words or so. Normal English, it's more like 1 in every 50,000.
Wow, she's not messing around. Legitimate feels central to how she sees evaluation as a whole.
Totally. It's like she's waving a giant flag saying, this word is key to understanding me. But she doesn't often tell us what she means by it.
That's kind of a risky move, right? It's like assuming everyone's on the same page, but they might be reading totally different books.
Big risk. Especially in evaluation where being clear and upfront is super important. Imagine a doctor using some fancy medical term but never explaining it. You want to be like, hold on, what's that mean?
For sure. Everyone needs to know the rules of the game. So Greene uses legitimate constantly, but doesn't give us a neat definition. Where do we look for clues?
Well, she keeps connecting legitimate to this idea of plurality. It's about the legitimacy of lots of different views, different stakeholders, even different ways of doing evaluation.
She's not saying there's just one right way. So what about these stakeholders? Who are they in the evaluation world?
Good question. It's anyone who's got skin in the game, so to speak. The people, the program effects, the people running it, funding it. And Greene isn't just talking about the bosses at the top. She means a much wider group. Program staff, people from the community, even the people the program is for.
It's about who's at the table when you decide how to even do the evaluation, right?
Right. And not just being in the room, but if their perspectives actually matter. Greene is big on this. For an evaluation to be legitimate, it's got to come from the real diverse experiences and values of all stakeholders, not just the ones with the most power.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. When Greene says legitimate, she's talking about including everyone, making sure all those different voices are heard, and that they genuinely shape how the evaluation happens.
And that's where things get really interesting. See, it starts to sound like legitimate. For Greene isn't just a description. It's a call to action.
A call to action. Now you've got me hooked. How does legitimate become an action in her work? So legitimate is like a verb for Greene. It's something you do.
Totally. You can practically see her thought process, right? Legitimate is this state of being, but also something you build, you create through action. Like she'll say the evaluation process can legitimize certain voices or certain actions advance legitimacy. She even uses equitably legitimizes action and equity. Very important for her.
Okay, so it's not enough to just be like, oh yeah, we hear those other viewpoints. We've got to actually make space for them to change the evaluation itself.
100%.
Yeah.
And this leads to the core of what she's saying. Greene lays out 3 big pillars that make an evaluation legitimate: worldview, actions, and actors.
Worldview, actions, actors. This is getting deep. So worldview first. What makes for a legitimate worldview when you're doing an evaluation, according to Greene?
It's got to be a mindset right from the start that values having everyone at the table.
Right.
And recognizing that different perspectives, they just inherently matter. They're valuable. Remember all those stakeholders we talked about. Greene's saying to get this legitimate foundation, you have to understand those different lived experiences, those different values that people bring.
So not just crunching numbers, seeing if a program hits some target we set beforehand.
Nope. Got to go deeper. Evaluation is never neutral, right? It's always coming from someone's values, someone's point of view. Greene wants us to admit those biases are there and then design our evaluations to be more fair, more inclusive because of it.
Which brings us to pillar number 2, actions. What kind of things do we do to make an evaluation legitimate in Greene's view?
Think about actions that open up real talk, real back and forth. Actions that make you think critically and maybe even shake up who's in charge of the evaluation. Greene talks about transformative learning and democratizing conversations, big words, but basically it's giving stakeholders power. They're not just being studied, they're shaping the whole process.
So instead of some top-down evaluation where it's the evaluator calling all the shots, Greene wants something way more collaborative. Everyone's a participant.
Exactly. Which takes us to the third pillar, actors. We talk about stakeholders, but Greene's take on who's a legitimate actor in this whole thing, it might surprise you.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Who else is part of this legitimate evaluation dance, according to Greene?
Notice who she doesn't focus on. The evaluator themselves. Like, she doesn't dwell on their credentials, their methods, even their personal beliefs as the main things that make them legitimate.
Interesting. It's almost like she's shifting power away from the evaluator, saying the community being evaluated, they're the ones who decide what's truly legitimate.
Exactly. Greene seems to be saying the evaluator's job is more about setting the stage, making sure the process is one where stakeholders can come to those legitimate judgments themselves, not about controlling what those judgments are.
Powerful distinction. Greene's shaking things up, pushing for evaluation that's more fair, more inclusive. But this focus on challenging the norm, does that mean Greene is using legitimate to dismantle the power structures in evaluation or to strengthen them? Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? Is Greene trying to shake things up or keep things the same? She's talking about including everyone, different values, challenging the way things are usually done. It's a lot.
That's what's so great about Greene's work, though. She doesn't give us easy answers. She makes us think hard about what we assume, what we base our evaluations on. Like, on the surface, legitimate. Sounds like it's about keeping things orderly, right? The status quo. But then Greene brings in fairness, different voices, and suddenly we're questioning the whole foundation of what's considered legitimate in the first place.
It's like she snuck in this whole other idea of progress hidden inside a word that seems kind of basic. Makes you think how much of what we accept as legitimate is just because it's how it's always been done, not because it's actually, right.
Exactly. And Greene's making us ask, who even gets to decide what's legitimate? If it's only the people in charge, well, nothing's going to change, right? We're just reinforcing the same old power structures. But if legitimate comes from everyone involved, all those different experiences, different values, then it's not about maintaining power. It's about changing things for real.
Okay, so we've explored Jennifer Greene, legitimate evaluation, all that. But how do we take these big ideas and actually use them in our own work? How we think about good evaluation? What's meaningful?
Try this. What if we swap out legitimate, hopeful in Greene's writing? Different words, see what happens. Like, instead of legitimate stakeholders, what about powerful stakeholders? Or vocal stakeholders?
Whoa, yeah. Suddenly it's not about what's fair or right. It's about who's got the most clout or who's the loudest. Legitimate. It's got all this hidden baggage we don't even realize.
For sure. The words we use, they matter. They change how we see the problem and what solutions we're even willing to consider.
Yeah.
So moving forward, think critically about legitimate. Don't just accept it. Dig in. Who's included in that word, who's left out, and what values are deciding that?
Great advice. One last thing before we wrap this up. What about the stuff Greene doesn't call legitimate? Does that automatically make it bad? Not worth our time.
That's the thing about Greene's work. It keeps you thinking. We could easily be like, if Greene didn't say it's legitimate, it's got to be wrong. But that misses the nuance.
So as much as we respect Greene's expertise, we can't just take her word as gospel. We've got to think for ourselves about what legitimate means in different situations, different evaluations.
Absolutely. Look for these same ideas: inclusivity, power dynamics, diverse values in other evaluation writing, guidelines, even your own work. How are they using legitimate? Who's included, who isn't, and what values are behind those choices?
This deep dive has been eye-opening. Legitimate. It's not just some jargon. It shows our values, our priorities, and our blind spots.
And if we want a more just world, a fairer world, we have to look at those values. Even when it's tough, even when it makes us uncomfortable, makes us question what we thought we knew.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just propping up the same systems of inequality we're trying to change.
So true. And on that note, one last thought for you all to chew on. If we want our evaluations to be transparent, rigorous, fair, shouldn't we expect the same from the word legitimate itself? Or else aren't we just hiding bias behind fancy language?
Something good to think about.
Yeah.
Until next time.